The CN Tower is probably the most recognizable symbol of Toronto. This was especially true in the years after it was first built. Toronto was a much smaller place in those days and lived partially in the shadow of Montreal, which was still the economic and cultural capital of the country in those days. However, the CN Tower was a landmark that Torontonians knew was truly world-class. Every Torontonian also knew that it was the tallest freestanding structure in the world. We memorized that phrasing. But why was it built? And what is it used for besides selling postcards? Today, we look at the history of the CN Tower, the most famous part of Toronto's skyline. I'm Adam Weiser.
And I'm Grayson Miller. And this is Muddy York.
Happy Canada Day to everyone.
Yes, happy Canada Day.
So great. What are you planning to do today?
Well, actually, it's my wedding anniversary always on Canada Day, so I do something fun with the wife.
Well, because it's Canada Day and we're dropping this episode today, we wanted something more than just a random corner of Toronto, so we picked the most famous landmark in the city. Now, we'll start with the most well-known and oft-repeated fact about the CN Tower. From 1975 until 2007, it was the tallest freestanding structure in the world. What does that mean? A freestanding structure is not supported by any guy wires. Note, these are guy wires, G-U-Y, not guide wires, which is what I used to think. Guy wires have one end attached to a structure and the other end anchored to the ground to provide stability. Think of them like the ropes on a tent, holding up a tent post. When the CN Tower was built, the tallest structure in the world was the Warsaw radio mast. However, it was a guide mast and couldn't stand on its own. That's why the CN Tower was the tallest freestanding structure in the world. It finally lost this status in 2007 when the Burj Khalifa was built in Dubai. Today, the CN Tower is the 10th tallest freestanding structure in the world, but it remains the tallest in the Western Hemisphere. Plus, it still holds the record for the world's highest bar and the world's highest wine cellar, which is way more impressive than some silly height competition.
So, why did the CN Tower get built? It was actually part of a much larger project dedicated to redeveloping the railway lands, the area between Front Street and the Gardiner that used to be a huge railway switching yard. By 1965, railway companies had begun shifting their operations to a depot in Vaughan, and the city had to decide what to do with a major plot of land sitting in the middle of downtown. Naturally, it took decades to make a decision, and it would almost be 60 years before the area was fully developed as City Place. However, one of the early ideas was a project called Metro Centre. In 1968, the Canadian National Railway, the CN in CN Tower, proposed to spend $1 billion to redevelop the area. Remember, this was $1 billion in 1968 money. Metro would house 20,000 people, provide 400,000 square meters of office space, and 55,000 square meters of commercial property. One of the more interesting features was that the surface streets were to have different sections for cars and for TTC, while people on foot would move below the surface in a skylit mall system similar to the PATH network. The Metro Centre project also included a 365-meter communications tower. As Toronto grew during the 1960s, new skyscrapers like the TD Centre were erected. These buildings reflected broadcast signals or blocked them altogether, hurting the quality of TV and radio reception. People would sometimes get two signals on their TV, superimposing one show over another. CN proposed that the new tower could solve these problems. They also saw it as a way to demonstrate the strength of Canadian industry. It's probably not a coincidence that CN was having a bit of an identity crisis as air travel increasingly replaced trains, and the company wanted to portray a bold and forward-looking image. The broader Metro Centre project got bogged down over the question of demolishing Union Station and was eventually cancelled. Can you imagine that actually happened? That would be crazy. The CN Tower was the one part of the project that would move ahead. As one would expect, the project faced opposition. The Canadian Owners and Pilots Association warned that sooner or later an aircraft is bound to strike it, possibly killing people in the tower and on the ground, as well as those in the aircraft. The Federation of Ontario Naturalists estimated that up to 1,000 birds a day would be killed during peak migration periods. For these reasons, Council took its time about approving the project. However, the builders decided not to wait and began construction without a permit. The tower had already reached 300 meters by the time it was approved. It's not really clear what would have happened if Council had said no.
The CN Tower was built by the Canada Cement Company, which has got to be the least creative corporate name that I've heard. And construction began in February 1973. Workers removed 56 tons of earth to build a 7-meter deep foundation made of concrete and steel. 40,000 square meters of concrete, all of it mixed on site, was poured from wheelbarrows into a massive mold called a slip form. As each layer of concrete dried, they shifted the slip form up to pour the next layer. Now, for engineering reasons that I don't really understand, I just work for engineers, I am not one myself, the concrete had to be poured at all hours of the day and night. The result was that construction continued 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. Workers also had to agree to a no-strike guarantee to prevent a disruption that could imperil the project. By August, the concrete stump of the CN Tower had become the highest building in Toronto. By February of 1974, it was the tallest structure in Canada, surpassing the Inco Superstack, a giant chimney in Sudbury. The construction site itself became an attraction as Torontonians came to see the tower slowly rise. Work on the Sky Pod came next, including construction of the revolving restaurant, the observation decks, and the radome, which is the inflatable donut-shaped object at the bottom of the main pod where the communication equipment is housed. The radome is covered by a Teflon-coated fiberglass fabric, which all sounds very complicated, which is designed to protect the electronics from the elements while still being able to send and receive transmissions.
The original plan had been to raise the antenna at the top of the tower by crane, but during construction, an S-64 Skycrane helicopter became available when the U.S. military sold one to a civilian contractor. It was nicknamed Olga and was first used to remove the crane. This nearly produced a tragedy when the crane became caught on the supporting bolts, tethering the helicopter in place. Steelworkers had to work frantically to melt the bolts and free the helicopter, which only had 14 minutes of fuel left when it landed. Olga would lift the antenna in 36 pieces. The flights of these antenna pieces were a minor tourist attraction, and the flight schedule was printed in local newspapers. During this period, numerous workers and members of the public signed their names on pieces of the antenna while it was still on the ground. Depending on what they signed with, some of those names may still be there after all these years. On March 31st, 1975, the CN Tower officially became the tallest freestanding structure in the world, with an editor of the Guinness Book of World Records on hand for the event. The only place higher that man has ever stood on a stationary base, except for a mountain peak, is the moon. The Toronto Star printed on opening day, "On Earth, man can climb no higher in any enclosed structure." 3 days later, the building was officially completed. It cost $63 million, about $320 million with inflation. God knows how much it would cost to build today.
Media broadcasts from the CN Tower began on May 1st, 1976. Building staff didn't really understand all of the technical issues involved with managing the equipment, so the TV and radio stations set up their own committee to manage space in the radome and coordinate their broadcast frequencies. We should add that the CN Tower continues to be a communications tower even today. TV stations like CBC and CTV and FM radio stations like CHFI and CHIN continue to broadcast from there. Bell Canada and TTC also use the CN Tower to manage their communication networks in Toronto. On June 26, 1976, the CN Tower was open to the public with a ceremony based almost entirely on height jokes. Donald MacDonald, the 6'5" Minister of Finance, represented the federal government, and two very tall people, 7-foot Roger Tickner and 6'3" Paula Lishman, officially activated the exterior lights as the clock struck midnight. The official grand opening was held on October 1st, at which time a time capsule was sealed within the building containing a letter from Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, letters from each provincial premier, letters from school children, copies of the 3 daily newspapers, Canadian currency, and To the Top, a video about the tower's construction. The capsule is scheduled to be opened in 2076. My big question is what the video was recorded on. Will we even be able to play it in 2076?
Betamax. I have no idea. Maybe, but probably. Although, yeah.
It wouldn't be any better if it's on VHS. When's the last time you saw a VCR?
I know. Wow. Well, the CN Tower immediately, as you probably guessed, became a Toronto landmark and provided an image that people around the world would instantly recognize. In 1995, it was declared one of the 7 wonders of the modern world by the American Society of Civil Engineers. It was also featured in the Sims City games, which is very important to people of a certain age. Today, it's probably best known for its appearance on the cover of Drake's Views album. Really? Best known for that?
People don't remember what happened more than 5 years ago.
Well, was it Views that's like 2016? Who knows? So there you go. It's almost 10 years ago. Naturally, when you build something really tall, somebody's going to want to climb it, and somebody else is going to want to jump off of it. People are weird. In 1979, a stuntman named Dar Robinson jumped off the CN Tower for a movie called High Point. It has an IMDb score of 4.6, so that stunt was probably the high point of the film. I love a good dad joke.
You're dead weight on this podcast.
Robinson was paid $150,000 for the stunt. A year later, he did it again, this time for a personal documentary. On the CN Tower's 10th anniversary, an American climber named Dan Goodwin used his hands and feet to climb one side of the building and rappel down the other. He then repeated his stunt going the other way. Another parachutist jumped off the building as part of the opening ceremonies for the Pan Am Games.
When the CN Tower was first built, the only attractions were the observation decks and the restaurant. In 1985, they decided to add something new.
Tour of the Universe. A place where time and space are yours to explore. An adventure into the galaxies. Destination Jupiter. Experience.
Tour of the Universe was the first flight simulator ride in the world. It used a pair of Boeing flight simulators for a voyage to Jupiter in the far distant future of 2019. The ride began with passengers being launched through the hollow core of the CN Tower before encountering an asteroid en route and being forced to return to Earth. When it launched, each ride cost $7. Tour of the Universe was the prototype for a host of later rides at different amusement parks, including Star Tours at Disney and the Simpsons ride at Universal Studios. Most importantly, when you called their phone number, the answering machine had this deep-voiced announcer saying, "Welcome to Tour of the Universe," with a bunch of sci-fi noises in the background. For reasons that I can't remember, my friends and I all thought this was incredible. The 80s was a simpler time. The tower was originally lit with old-fashioned incandescent bulbs, but these were removed in 1997 because they were inefficient and expensive to repair. In 2007, LED lights were installed. Each fixture can produce 16.7 million colors, and the tower can now be lit to commemorate holidays and special events. You can even apply to have the tower lit for your event, as long as it's not commercial, religious, or political. An interesting fact about the LED lights is that they are directional. and the light can be controlled and directed. This ensures that the light doesn't spill onto nearby hotels and offices. The lights are also turned off during bird migration seasons to avoid the collisions that the naturalists were so concerned about. In 2010, they added the Edge Walk, in which mentally unbalanced people pay $199 to walk around the roof of the main pod just above the revolving restaurant. Unfortunately, when they're finished, these people are allowed to simply ride the elevator back down instead of being committed to a psych ward for the therapy that they so clearly require.
I somewhat agree with you. I see those pictures and I'm like, this is crazy. Because if you died doing that, nobody would have any sympathy for you, I feel like. Anyways, the biggest change over the years has been the area around the CN Tower. When it was first erected, the CN Tower was the only significant development along that section of Front Street. The area around it was still an unused train yard. The convention center was built in 1984, but the big change came when Skydome was built in 1989. The CN Tower with the dome at its base became the quintessential image of Toronto. Skydome also led to the construction of the Skywalk from Union Station to the base of the tower. This was important because until then, it had actually been difficult to get to the CN Tower on foot. The City Place project, along with the construction of the Ripley's Aquarium and Roundhouse Park, means that the area is now fully developed, just as the original planners had imagined. There's an interesting question to be asked about the relationship between Torontonians and our most famous landmark. The CN Tower has a mixed presence in our collective imagination. On one hand, we often regard it as a cheesy tourist trap that we only visit with out-of-towners. But it's still a reassuring sight. A philosopher, Mark Kingwell, wrote, "It follows that if we can see it, it can see us." The tower, dominant and unmovable on its commanding lakeshore site, is thus forever gathering up the city into its gaze and spreading it out again, redeploying it. The tower holds the city together. Its horizon of vision and national dome of possibility that, more than any geographical or political boundary, marks the edges of this place. As a last note, we should add that CN sold its stake in the tower in 1995, prompting questions about whether it would continue to be the CN Tower. However, the Crown Corporation that now owns the tower decided that its new name would be Canada's National Tower, or the CN Tower for short. It was one of the better naming decisions that's been made in Toronto.
Thank you, everyone, to listening to us on this holiday. You can email us at muddy_york@outlook.com, or you can follow us online on Twitter at Toronto_history, on Blue Sky at Muddy York, all one word, and on Facebook at Muddy York History, all one word. Any last thoughts, Bray?
No, but for sure, send us an email. I know lots of people have great memories of the CN Tower. Lots of Torontonians have never been to the CN Tower. So if you lived here your entire life and never even been, that's also interesting to hear. So write us a note. Let us know what you think. Have you climbed it? I've actually climbed it. I actually have a crazy story about meeting Denzel Washington in the CN Tower at the 360 for this event for TIFF, a very Toronto story. I got very nervous. He looked very cool when he was coming up to talk to me. I got nervous and I do not know what happened to my voice. I reclaimed a 16-year-old going through puberty. I said, "Hi, Denzel," or something atrocious like that. He looked at me, walked away immediately, and that was the least cool moment of my life, topping some pretty shameful stuff in middle school.
Gray, you scared away Denzel Washington.
I did.
Although I should add, saying that Denzel looked cool is kind of redundant.
Yes, 100%. All right. That's it for me.